Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald!
No,
around the body. Jazz up!
He's off from inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal from inside the centre. Fuck! I can't believe it.
Good whatever time of day you're listening to this. If you didn't know, that's why we usually open with good time of day. This is Americans Watching the Footy. I am your co-host, Ethan Castle, coming to you from South San Francisco, California.
I am your co-host, Benjamin Castle, coming to you from San Diego, California. It's time for some more progress reports. We're so invested in doing game-by-game recaps, but we also want to make sure that the teams that aren't playing just don't get forgotten other than trade discussions.
Our policy for this, other than for, opening round and those buys, when you have your actual regular mid-season buy, we like to do a little progress report.
And here we are. We got 4 more teams on buys in round 14, with things being more spread out this year. As we said, we like that. We're used to spread out buys, thanks to the NFL. When Tasmania comes in, if they do, that's gonna complicate things a lot, because we might have, I'm not sure if we're gonna have like a standard set of mid-season buys, or we'd probably have everybody with 2 buys.
Well, I think it would have to be just because of the number of teams versus the number of rounds. Whereas the NFL, you didn't have to have every team have multiple buys because you had, 31 teams in 17 weeks. Whereas if you'd have 19 teams and 23 or 24 rounds, you'd have to.
Looks like in 2011, the AFL had buys for 1 team most weeks and had a couple weeks thrown in throughout that had 3 teams on buys.
Oh, because what I would have said would have been, you'd probably have a week that's like, I was going to say you probably just keep your normal buys and then also throw in weeks where other teams get one. So like everyone will have one somewhere in these middle rounds and then also have one either early or late.
Well, that'll be a problem come 2028, if anything.
We hope.
Yeah, we do hope. You got to see a prominent Tasmanian today.
Yeah, Mitchell Owen.
How did your second day at the cricket compare to your first?
Had friends there that I got to explain things to. I'm just, I'm disappointed I didn't get to see a competitive match, but I got to see a Glenn Maxwell century. And while it was a pretty small crowd tonight, not only is it a weeknight, you didn't have the Super Kings brand, you had a few Knight Riders fans there, but nowhere near the pull that the Super Kings have. But it was pretty fun just seeing everyone try to encourage Maxwell and just hope that he would have enough chances to get to the century before the 20 overs finished up. And he was able to stay on strike enough and he got it done. It was really exciting.
And then the Knight Riders bats just largely went quiet, I see. They got a lot of prominent West Indies players there. Ryan, Powell, Russell.
Yeah, unfortunately, Russell only lasted for 4 balls. He hit a 4 and then got caught immediately after.
Well, Ryan lasted even less. Bold first ball by Mark Adair.
But yes, even though I didn't get to see a couple of really exciting games or anything, I'm glad to have had this experience, and I'm glad that there's been at least a few people, not a ton, but a few people that really didn't know cricket before that are starting to get exposure to the sport. As I might have mentioned in our prior episode, crowd is probably 80 to 90%, Indian and other South Asian, people who knew cricket. There were a few Australians there tonight cheering Glenn Maxwell on, one of which was wearing a Brisbane Lions hat. It was fun talking footy briefly with a couple of Australians. But yeah, just to have those few people starting to learn something about cricket is really good.
Would love for the league to keep going and expanding to actually having everybody at home sites, because right now it's just 3 stadiums in play.
Yes,
'Cause-
and only 2 of those really have a home team.
Yeah, because there's actually no home team there is it technically in Lauderhill?
Somewhere around Fort Lauderdale, somewhere in Broward County.
So somewhere where people are celebrating tonight.
Yeah.
Congratulations to the back-to-back Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, who helped keep the greatest fact in all of sports true.
An American team has won the Grey Cup more recently than a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup.
The Grey Cup being the Canadian Football League championship trophy. Canadian football, yes, is different and older than American football. And we've got a friend of a friend who actually is big on it now because he's actually probably pretty sad in Edmonton. That being our friend Craig from A Yank on the Footy, his friend Mick Aussie.
I'm trying to think of what a comparison with this would be. It would be like if maybe, I don't know, say the NBL was like 3/4 Australian and 1/4 New Zealand, and those New Zealand teams never won. And then you had like, say, some rugby competition or something that was mostly New Zealand and then like one Australian team, and that one Australian team won it on occasion, and then none of the New Zealand teams ever won the NBL. Actually, maybe that's not a great comparison because I guess New Zealand would also have to be like super basketball hungry for this to be an accurate comparison. Anyway, it's funny.
It's such a unique thing that it's really hard to make the comparison, which is why it's my favorite fact in all of sports. And it's true for yet another year.
I mean, I just think as a whole, it's also really fun when people get beat at their own games, like when England loses in rugby, or when England loses in soccer, or when England loses in cricket.
Hockey was initially English too.
It was also like brought to Canada by the Dutch in part and drew some influence from like the Canadian First Nations. So I don't know if that's a great comparison.
Also, the N in NHL did at one time stand for national, as in, hey, these teams are all Canadian. The hilarity continues in the United States, but our eyes are on Australia, and my eyes are actually on this wheel, because let's figure out who out of the 4 teams we're covering first, and it's
The Mighty Sun.
Remember, as the chaos of the ladder continues during the bye rounds, the Suns actually have 2 games in hand on most teams, and despite that, they still sit in 6th at 8-4. Percentage is pretty good, 123.2, though they did come into the bye on a 2-game skid and have a tough task right out of it with the greatest rivalry in all of footy,
The Expansion Cup. Okay, so here's the thing.
Started up friends.
While they are in 6th on the ladder, they've only got 4 losses, whereas 4th and 5th both have 5 losses. So you can make a case for them to really belong in 4th, especially if you did it just off of like winning percentage. That is where they'd be. So they're 6th, but they really belong in 4th, especially if you, let's assume they beat Essendon, probably actually would put them more in like 5th because of percentage, putting them behind the Crows. Because right now their percentage is behind Adelaide, who actually has the best percentage of all, Collingwood, and Geelong, but ahead of everyone else except for the Bulldogs, who, in typical Bulldogs fashion, have the 4th best percentage and are currently in 9th.
It sucks that they're going to get this home final, and I just want to see them crash and burn.
I am loving your role as the Suns hater because, like I've said, someone needed to do it.
When you're getting absolutely coddled by the league, not just for umpiring, but for the system of handouts that they have, it's less the academy and more looking back further at the last total ripoff of priority picks, because they were able to get Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson thanks to priority in 2019. And that's definitely bearing its fruit right now. Anderson is definitely in the Brownlow race. Matt Rowell is still Matt Rowell, and he is destructive at stoppage. But there's also so much more that's been working for this team. The fact that they also, though, just like were always the one kind of outside draft strategy meant that they were like, yeah, fuck it. We'll deal as many picks as we want to get the pieces that we need. And they are definitely reaping the benefits of John Noble and even more so Dan Rioli this year. Those acquisitions are working well despite the concern that maybe that halfback rank could be too crowded otherwise. You've got Rioli tending to go more centrally as he goes over the length of the oval. Will Powell can do that, perhaps a bit more on the outside. They're moving pieces well enough, and Noble is more of an initial distributor, though he can come downfield to contest in the air, which is also nice. Rioli's definitely more of a ground player still.
Tuke Miller, I've always appreciated his ability as a long kick down the corridor, a long and accurate kick. But this year, what I've really liked about him is the speed at which he gets some of his kicks off.
Well, and he's also had a new role as well because you've got Rioli to do it further back. Miller has been playing front of center really for the first time in his career. And yeah, damn, that's working. I'm not surprised because of the quality of the player that Miller is. I'm surprised that it's actually happening now of all times. He's got a goal a game. He's got 12 in 12 when before this he had never kicked more than 8 goals in a season.
But yes, his ability to get rid of the ball quickly, like he'll have a nice disposal and then I'll look back. It's like, wait, who just had that assist? Oh, it was Miller, of course. It's kind of like, basketball players who get their shots up really quickly. That's something that I think Tuke might do better than anyone else in the entire league. Is just the speed at which he's able to get rid of the ball, the speed at which he's able to kick.
And we're saying that even though he's
like, I guess the best equivalent, other than like getting your shot up quickly in basketball, would be like pop time for a catcher, which is a baseball term. Basically,
that's like pop in the catcher's glove to pop in the second baseman or whoever's glove. Yeah. Miller is in 4th on the Suns goal tally. 3rd is Jed Walter with 14, who's continuing to grow into his frame and his role.
So Jed Walter is the protected species that nobody talks about.
Because people see it with the leader, Ben King.
No, because people see it with Charlie Curnow because he plays for the Blues and Jed Walter plays for the Suns.
And also for the Suns, the focus is more on Ben King.
Who, by the way, does not ever kick anything that's not for goal, basically.
His 33 goals lead the way for Gold Coast this year. He has had 59 kicks this season and 46 have registered as scores. And we've always thought that he had the ability to do so much more over the fall oval. I mean, you look back at like 2020 before he did his ACL, he was doing some decent running. When he got Walter in there as well, I mean, it's nice to have multiple talls, but I still wanted to diversify his game a bit more, play him a bit further upfield because Walter's roaming all right. My favorite story, though, for the Suns in terms of production this year and as a whole is the continued renaissance of Ben Long.
Long,
who has 24 goals already on the year, including 5 games of 3 goals or more. One of those was the hard-fought round 10 win over Hawthorn, where he really provided the dagger.
Remember when he was just this kind of forgettable, ineffective depth halfback?
With the Saints and then in 2023 with the Suns as well?
Yeah, and then Damian Hardwick threw him forward, and he's been like incredible in that role.
In the 28 games he has played under Damian Hardwick, he's kicked goals in 25 of them. He's kicked 50 goals in that time. The fact that they're getting this use, these different uses out of already established players, guys who are in the middle to later parts of their career, like Tuke Miller, who's 29, like Ben Long, who's 27, is what gives me strong belief that Damian Hardwick and company are doing the right thing, much to my dismay. It's nothing against Hardwick. It's nothing against the players. It is against the brand that is the Gold Coast Suns.
My gripe with the Suns is they've gotten more calls than anyone except Hawthorn this year. But like, I do think they've built this roster well. They've built a good core. They've found good supplemental pieces. They've made things out of guys that I didn't think were actually all that good. That turns out they've found some use of. I thought for a while Caleb Graham was going to have to be that kind of anchor in the middle of the defense. And instead, it's become Sam Collins, who's had a couple of brilliant games this year. I think it was the polished turd for that loss at Geelong going into the bye. And just these guys know how to build a successful team at this point. And I think it seems like at this point they have probably arrived And like the actual football, other than the umpiring, I find enjoyable. Like the atmosphere at their games gets a little annoying. But like I don't have all this against them. Like I think they've worked their way up the ladder. They've paid their dues largely.
Along with Sam Collins, Bodie Hewlin has remained one of the stronger marking presences for the Suns, though he's also done a bit more moving things out. Collins has been the steady defensive presence throughout. But who leads the Suns in marks this year, Ethan?
I actually probably would have guessed Bodie Hewlin. Who is it?
You're still surprised he's in defense, but it's working all right. It's Joel Jeffrey.
Wow, I just wouldn't have thought of him for that. Like, I know he's done really well defensively. I just thought like he wasn't putting up bigger numbers until more recently.
He did have 13 against North and 11 in Q Clash. But no, just the fact that he's been this steady defensive mark when we thought of him as more of a scoring type. I mean, especially after that performance, what was it, out in Ballarat in 2022, where he kicked one over his head. This is another different use for a player that we thought had already maybe been established. And if nothing else, he still could be some forward depth if things go really awry, but that doesn't look really necessary at this time with King, Walter, Will Graham is growing into things. Even though we haven't seen him since round 9, he does already have 10 goals on the year. Ethan Reed will have more time. But I think tall stocks are pretty set, and then Bailey Humphrey can play above his size too.
Yeah, like I would love to see Jeffrey get some forward time just off of the entertainment factor there. He's able to do some pretty impressive stuff. But I like the way he's held down the fort in the back. And like, again, the biggest compliment to this coaching staff is what they've done with guys like him and Ben Long. Because, I mean, it's obviously pretty easy to like make Matt Rowell look good, or not even make Matt Rowell look good. Like Matt Rowell's just going to play the way he plays, and it's hard to fumble that.
Humphrey was actually your sleeper pick for the Suns this year, so good job. I felt pretty obvious because you've been high on Humphrey already.
Yeah, I just didn't think he would be like contested midfield ground ball get machine guy, which is what he's been.
You saw him as more of a small forward type. And he did have 4 goals once. That was against the Swans, round 7. My sleeper pick was Ned Boyle, and he's had limited opportunities. It's going to be tough to get opportunities behind Jared Witz, but with the combination of management and Witz's age, it's going to come with time. We've seen him twice this year, so he's played 12 games overall at this point, and he was extended this past year, so you'll see more of him, no doubt. We know the Suns are going to have a confusing ending to the season fixture-wise, that there may be a Wednesday in there at some point because they've got to make up that game against Essendon going back from opening round. Thank you, Cyclone Alfred. Remaining road games, the Giants, Essendon, Adelaide, Carlton, and Port Adelaide. They still got 2 trips to the Adelaide Oval left. Weird.
They've got a much tougher back half to the season altogether, which we had said from the start.
Weird, though, that you'd be leaving those 2 Adelaide Oval trips later on, but I mean, they're the Suns, so they aren't going to play at the Adelaide Oval and gather around.
At least for now. Maybe one day.
You think they're going to ever be a big enough draw for that?
I mean, maybe they get scheduled against one of the home teams at some point.
The Lions are reigning premiers, and they still haven't been to the Adelaide Oval in gather around, which was a disgrace because that matchup against the Bulldogs deserved that.
In terms of other remaining big games, again, Expansion Cup this week. You've got home against Collingwood, home Q Clash, home Expansion Cup. The remaining schedule for this team is a lot tougher, so I think it'll be much more fun to talk about them, and I think they're going to get tested more and more because I don't think the tests they've had this far, I mean, beating the Crows at home was significant. Pulling away from the Swans after a slow start was big, and I mean, both the Darwin wins are quite good, but we're at the point where we've accepted, like, they're unstoppable in Darwin.
They're 8-0 there.
So with the hiccups going into the bye, I think it's a really well-timed bye for them. But I think, look, if they're going to end up playing finals and maybe hosting a final or multiple finals, they'll have definitely earned that because the road to a top 4 spot at this point is not going to be an easy one. I mean, they only have, like, how many remaining games do you look at and say, yeah, they'll handle business there? I can see, maybe both with Essendon, definitely Essendon at home. You would think they'd handle Richmond at home. And you would think they'd handle the D's. That's only 4.
They'll still need to pick up, maybe 3 more wins to guarantee themselves top 4, 2 to get a home final. Doable, though. Easily doable.
I guess before we spin the wheel again, concluding statement I have would be, I guess before we spin the wheel again, my final statement would be congrats to the Suns on officially ascending to being relevant. I don't know how high the ceiling is. I don't know where this is going to go, but I think they've broken the cycle of same old Suns, and that I am excited about.
I'd be more excited if they were, what do you always say, in Humpty Doo? But yes, we spin the wheel again. From a team with heightened expectations, we go to a team that had absolutely no expectations.
I guess we're going to Richmond then, yeah?
Yup, and I am actually really enjoying. It's not a real Richmond rise because they are sitting in 17th, but the fact that they've already won 3 games makes it a success in and of itself, honestly.
Oh no, this season they've already passed the test. Even if their last game going into the bye was underwhelming, they just looked like a totally undermanned team. They've alternated their last 4 games going into the bye. Competitive losses and games where it's just like, yeah, they just don't have enough.
Okay, that's kind of what you want to see from a developing team. But this is a team that had the biggest crop of high draft picks that we'd seen in eons. And I'm not even wanting to count the expansion packages given to the Suns and Giants, because that's a different category there.
But yeah, this is a full-on scorched earth rebuild, and unfortunately, I have been hit pretty hard by the injury bug lately, but they've been an entertaining watch more often than I would have expected.
Tigers sitting at 3-10 with a pretty nice percentage, 69.4. Do we say nice when there's a decimal after?
I think that's okay.
All right, nice then.
Nice.
Second worst record, second worst percentage. They made the most of their draft capital from this past year in a gigantic class, and they'll have another high pick or 2 this year as well. So all's good there?
Yeah, most of their losses have not been as competitive, but that they've won games at all has been really fun.
I so want them to beat Adelaide. Not that I have anything against Adelaide, but that the guy that I remember that said, I don't think Richmond are winning any games this year was Crow's double premiership captain Mark Bickley. Richmond's 3 wins this year against the Blues in round 1. The Suns in round 6, of course, they beat the Suns at Marvel now, and the Eagles in round 9. So all 3 of their wins are home wins, which isn't surprising. A couple narrow losses as well. Their best road showing a 3-point loss against the Giants at the Showground.
That felt like one that got away, but one that you also can't be that mad about. It's like kind of, in some ways, the perfect loss for a rebuilding team, where you gave 3 good quarters. I think you'd probably rather it be a bad first quarter than a bad fourth quarter.
The West Coast Eagles could tell you about that.
But as I said after that loss to the Giants, as long as blowing leads and running out of gas doesn't become a habit that carries over to when you're trying to launch yourself into being competitive, you could actually be pretty satisfied with how this game went and how the season as a whole has gone. Actually having a healthy midfield was kind of cool. I don't know how much you actually expect that to last, knowing Dion Prestia's health history as well as Jacob Hopper, but when you actually get both of those guys and Tim Taranto out there, it's really fun. Nick Blostone continues to masterfully anchor the defense. Up front, Sam Lawler's kind of got this beat wet in a forward role rather than be the midfielder that people think he's going to be. As a forward, I see him as kind of like a more stable Ken Zurhaar.
Well, Zurhaar had been pretty damn stable for a good portion of this year, so maybe the comparison's a little weakened by that, but before he, missed these past few games nursing his hamstring, he kicked 11-5 and had 9 assists in his first 10 games, including that very memorable debut with 2 goals and 1
ball.
Flash would be the term I would use. I believe it's the term I did use for our episode title for that round 1 recap. But yeah, already 4 multi-goal games for him and a 4 assist showing too against the Lions of all teams. That was a game that had some constant fight back from Richmond. and is one of the ones where you look back and really be able to reflect on the positives with the Hopper and Taranto combo there. Lawler not just have those 2 goals and 4 assists, but also multi-goal game out of Steely Green, Seth Campbell, Sam Banks, how Harry Armstrong had 2. Like, there's no doubt about the potential of this team. And I think Seth Campbell has probably arrived already, if not like being like just off the arrival. 1911 in his 13 games. He's the one that had the flip after the dagger against the Blues and has already had 8 multi-goal games this year. Richmond need to lock this guy up now before Tasmania has any chance at him, hypothetically.
I think at minimum at this point, he's a player that makes it into opposing scouting reports as a like, don't let this guy get loose.
No, he's one of the best sprints, honestly, in the league, and it's decent finishing ability too as a small forward. Just you've got to play backside on him because you can't let him get out behind you.
You know who else is one of the better sprinters in the league?
Mhm.
Hugo Ralph Smith.
I was wanting to leave the Hugo discourse to you, but let him roam. Don't have him as a defender. I don't know why they tried that.
Yeah, I like him as a wing player more than anything.
When was it that he was like taken back into the defensive 50 and totally got exposed?
Oh, I don't know.
Was that against Sydney, maybe? I forget. Regardless, know his role. You got speed on this team. Along with Seth Campbell, Ryan Mansell can make it into that small forward conversation, though I've seen him have more utility outside the 450 as well. Steely Green is small and fast, too. Like, this is a pesky team to play against. And, like, I would love to have people start talking about the Richmond Mosquito Fleet in a year or two, because we hear that term thrown around with Hawthorn a lot.
I'm just impressed that they've been able to stay competitive in more than half their games. You know, there have been a couple of major stinkers in there, but overall, this team has been able to hold their own and keep us paying attention to them, unlike last year. Having Nick Blostone lock down a defense when they're under attack certainly helps.
Ben Miller has popped up for some stronger games this year, too, and that's also been important when Noah Balta has been Noah Balta.
That's all I have to say about that.
Are you going to compliment Ben Miller? Or?
Yeah, I mean, going all the way back to the round 1 comeback, he's had some really good games. He's had a couple where, you know, he looks like maybe he has some growing developmental lives to still do. I mean, physically, he's pretty well grown, but like he is having the sort of season that gives you hope for the future of this club, between just the fact that the one-on-one defending's been really sharp. He's going in there against the biggest, most physical matchups every week and doing pretty darn well at it.
Richmond have only suffered 1 loss of more than 20 points since... Gather round. Granted, they've only won 2 of those games, but the only one where they truly stunk up the joint from the start was against Hawthorn, though their back 3 quarters against the Swans weren't anything I would describe as pretty.
And I would write off the Swans game as a pretty ugly one.
Yeah, the Hawthorn one, the Sydney one, those are the ugly ones since where they got shown up by Freo. Out of the bye, they're going to close round 15 against the Bulldogs before hosting Adelaide, and then making another trip down the highway. Winnable games for them? There's still a decent amount. Essendon, Eagles, Saints, and North all seem attainable.
I think this is a team that can just, like, you catch them at the wrong time. Like, either you're coming off of a tough stretch of games or coming off a bye, and maybe you're a team that doesn't respond well to byes. They can knock you off on the right day. And I think they have already earned so much more respect than they had at the start of the year.
And I'll note that Adelaide did lose 3 straight post-bye games, 2021 through 23. So there you go.
And Geelong post-bye has been a concern at times as well.
We've already talked a good bit about your sleeper pick for the year for Richmond, Ethan, because it's Steely.
Has he set the world on fire? No, but he's done a nice job just kind of cementing himself into the lineup. He's been one of the more pressure-oriented forwards at times. Would love to see him maybe go a couple weeks in a row without giving up a free kick, because that's been an issue for him, but...
He actually has only given up 8 this year and had a stretch from rounds 6 through 10 where he didn't give up any.
Wow, that does not match up with,
The eye test?
does not match up with my perception, but good to know that.
Needs to be a cleaner player, though, is the point. He's kicked 7 goals, 8 this year. Love that he's still wearing number 48. His story's just awesome, too. Named after Steely Dan, was a really promising sailor before getting struck by lightning and only then shifting his attention to the footy. Like, read up on this guy if you haven't. My sleeper pick was most prominent in Richmond's first 3 games, was only the sub and a couple more after that. It's Jacob Bauer, and wait a minute, is number 24 open on Richmond's list or not? No, Taj Houghton's got that. We'll probably see him shortly after the bye. Damn, because Bauer should be wearing 24. Anyway, Bauer could figure into a mix as like a third tall forward in there, but hasn't been getting AFL opportunities in a good while. Checking on his VFL numbers, though, he's kicked goals in 5 of his 7 VFL outings for the year, so there's positivity there. Not sure if he's someone you'd see in again right away, but a name to watch for 2026 and 27. Kind of remarkable, by the way, that Richmond have won 3 games when they haven't had anybody scoring even 20 goals so far this year. Seth Campbell leads the way at 19.
You know, Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did. How did you know that number, Ethan? Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters. Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed. It's so easy you can edit it while drunk. And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do. Best of all, it's completely free. Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
Again, this is episode 245 of Americans Watching the Footy, coming to you from 2 spots in California, about, an 8-hour drive or 75-minute flight apart. I'm Benjamin Castle in San Diego. You can follow me on Twitter at BenjaminHK01.
I'm Ethan Castle. I'm in South San Francisco. Follow me at Castle Media. Follow our executive producer, Brian Harambe, who's sleeping right next to me, on Instagram at Cat Named Brian.
I interacted with another cat today at a bookstore, which makes me miss that cat even more. And I've made a promise to myself, and I've said this to a lot of people, when I move out on my own somewhere, I am getting 2 cats. Collectively, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Americans Footy. And our memes are getting liked by official team accounts, so that's something. In particular, the Giants enjoyed the new forward order meme.
So I guess this is kind of, despite the head-to-head result, I guess this is kind of supplanted Adelaide's FTW line.
I think both are valid, but considering the Crows were no-goal 7 from those 3 this past week, there's that. I think they can coexist, and I would love to see them go up against each other in a final. Lug it out. Give us 120 points each way in a final.
Give us the game we should have had the conditions been better.
2 teams down and 2 to go in these progress reports. We've got the ladder leaders and last year's minor premiers. Is that really the most positive thing I can say about them? I guess so. And we'll have to wait on them because Collingwood has come up here. Collingwood, the quantities are known. There's nothing that they're reinventing aside from solidifying our belief in Ned Long.
I think they've been a pretty fascinating team because of who they've gotten their contributions from.
Ned Long being one of them.
Ned Long, Jack Crisp finding a second wind after he looked pretty finished not long ago.
I mean, you can say that also about Steele Sidebottom.
Now, Sidebottom was, had been trending in that direction. But Crisp, I think just the level to which he's bounced back this year has been remarkable. This is a guy who, last year, got dropped to the sub role at one point and just only had a couple of really, notable performances throughout the year. And this year, he's been such a huge weapon in the midfield. Now, considering that he's into his 30s, it does beg the question, can this keep up? Is this sustainable? But I think that generally speaking with this Collingwood team, for every spot where it looks like they might be due to regress. There's another spot where they're probably due to get some better performances, such as Nick Dacos.
He hasn't set the world on fire this year, and that's completely okay because they found other ways to succeed. They are 11-2, and they have the second best percentage at 134. The Crows, by the way, have the best. And of course, Collingwood beat Adelaide because they just do that. Their 2 losses this year, opening round to the Giants again, and one of the games of the year, round 8 against Geelong, spoiling Jack Crisp's big moment. Or really, did Jack Crisp spoil it himself? Question mark, whatever. Congrats to Crisp, by the way, on reaching 250 consecutive games on King's birthday.
You know, you mentioned Dacos, and he did have that one monster game against the Lions, but other than that, he's just been, he's been solid. He's had moments, he's had flashes, but his game has taken a bit of a step back this year, and it really hasn't been a tremendous concern, which is kind of amazing to think.
Who would you say leads their best at Ferris at this time? In our eyes, it could even be Long. Josh has stepped up more. He's had a much more visible and tangible role, I'd say.
I would say probably Crisp leads it, would be my guess.
Reasonable. I think Long is trending up there, though, and so is Josh. I think we're definitely more complimentary of Josh Dacos at this stage this year than we were last, because we thought of him as mostly an accumulator. He's actually getting the ball more this year than last, about 3 touches more per game, because he's at 27.7 right now, but he feels more involved this year.
Oh, easily. Like, I think Anzac Day, he had a case to actually win the Anzac medal. He's had a lot of games where he's kind of shaped stuff from the outside and just been more prominent overall.
For scoring, the year started with contributions from Tim Membry, and now more so it's come from Brody Majacek and Jamie Elliott. Elliott, since round 7, has had 4 games of at least 5 goals, and Majacek has had multiple 4-goal showings as well. Majacek's consistency is pretty remarkable. I didn't even realize that he was drafted and brought onto Collingwood's list with the expectation that he'd be playing in defense. And Elliott's another one who's getting up there in age. Elliott is 32, in fact.
He's totally got a second win this year. I guess that's one of the less surprising things.
I guess. I mean, it was just 2 years ago that he had 39 goals, but he
just
already...
Like relative to how stunned I am by Jack Crisp's revival. So I guess my big picture breakdown of this Collingwood team has been, even if they aren't quite getting the breaks that they got a couple years ago when they just won every close game, and they're not getting like the generational Nick Dacos season that some had predicted, like that they found other ways to compete and win has been really impressive. And it's such a testament to this coaching staff.
They won that game at Freo despite resting a whole bunch of guys. That's probably one that stands out to you the most. It definitely stands out to me. And it wasn't just, it wasn't a complete nail biter. They led at every change. Actually, don't think they trailed that game outside of the opening segment. And until the closing minutes, they actually led by 20.
I mean, I like the depth on this team. I like the depth on this team to the point that, like, Joe Richards left for Port, and it's really been not a huge factor.
One of the depth pieces I would have made a sleeper pick, but he seemed too obvious. And after his performances against North and Hawthorn, I feel that even more, that being Ed Allen.
I like him. He's just a quality high-floor player. I've talked about him a bunch on prior episodes as well.
Since the first game where we saw him, which was a limited role in the draw against Freo last year, but the closing round win against the Demons in that dead rubber, just something stood out to me about his cleanliness and still his ability to pressure. You see him more starting back of center, but good running capacity, can play up the field pretty nicely. He seems like he's already got a pretty complete tool set at age 21, and as age might end up catching up to some of these Collingwood players, like they can't all go like this forever, can they? At some point, Ed's going to have a consistent top 22 opportunity if it hasn't already arrived. Like not even top 22, top 18. And I hope that his brother can live up to his potential too. We'll have a bit to talk about with Bo next week. I do love that Ed's debut came against one of his father's old clubs, and that his best game so far came against the other one of them, because Ben Allen was a premiership player with Hawthorn and then was Frio's inaugural captain. That's why it's the Glendinning Allen medal. And I'm talking about him because my sleeper pick has not appeared in an AFL game this year, that being Jacob Ryan. In fact, he hasn't appeared in one since his debut, where he very quickly did his hamstring, I believe. Or was it a concussion for him? Yeah, it was a concussion on debut for him back in late stage of 2023 against Brisbane. He recently had, a piece where he said he's backing himself in, and in the VFL, he's been going all right. So there can be an opportunity there if somebody at halfback needs to be filled out. Your sleeper pick actually hasn't gotten any games either, Ethan.
Harry DiMatteo, did I go with him again?
No, we can't repeat them.
Oh, who did I go with?
Tao Jaff.
That's right. He's been knocking on the door.
So has Jacob Ryan. The fact that you've got these guys knocking on the door despite everything else that this team already has is just a sign of good depth, good training, good everything at Collingwood. Like, people don't really talk about Collingwood as being a good culture club because that's not the reputation they have. You see it right now, though.
Oh, yeah. Like, I think back to the way they all got around Jack Crisp after his miss, after the siren. And it seemed like, the basic message they were all conveying was like, we wouldn't have had a shot to win this without you, etc. But no, they get this thing right. I think Craig McRae does a really good job of like pushing team building stuff that doesn't seem forced or corny.
I feel like we're taking so much of Collingwood and their success for granted, despite the fact that they've played games without a number of important pieces.
I had mentioned Jath as a sleeper, and it's just tough for him to get a game with such a solid defense, including premiership player Billy Frampton. The defense is so rock solid that it's tough for someone like Jath to get a game. Isaac Quainer remains comically underappreciated. Darcy Moore continues to do his thing. Jeremy Howe is another one who's gone above and beyond this season. That's one that I think we haven't mentioned yet, who's been absolutely on fire the last few weeks.
Going to be 35 in a couple weeks, and looks like he's definitely got a couple years in the tank. I mean, there was a real case for him to win the Neil Danaher Trophy.
That went to what, Josh Dacos?
It did, but I don't think we minded that.
Yeah, that was like, for these awards, midfielders get just a little too much love, but in this case, like, it was a negligible enough difference that it wasn't like some massive injustice.
Josh had like an important 34. It was the fact that Jeremy Howe keeps winning these one-on-ones at his age. I mean, we know his vertical, but the fact that he can still contest like this is what impresses us, and that also softened the blow of having been without Darcy Moore for 2 games. It was that combination of Howe and Frampton. Like, they have enough guys to patch up the holes if they're temporary, and you've still got the dynamic younger pieces too. Ethan is as big a Beau McCreary fan as it can get outside of Collingwood's fan base.
He's been awesome. And he's starting to do it where it shows up a little bit more on the stat sheet. He's never going to be a guy getting like 18, 20 touches.
He's averaging about 10.8.
Yeah, which is a step up.
Like a very slight step up from these past couple years. I think he's settled into his role pretty nicely.
Oh, no, he's great at it.
Can he take another step is my next question, though. Like, is there something more that we haven't seen from him yet that we could see the back half of this year going into, again, a future where Collingwood are going to have some real fundamental list changes? We think of this year as like the last ride, yeah?
Yeah, or at least like the last one before there starts to be a major transition. Because as we've said, there's a great old guard, there's a great young group, but the middle is kind of thin.
Looking at last game and the games played, I think that's going to be pretty indicative of it. You had 6 guys above 200 games and 4 within their first 25. And the 4th of those is Ned Long in his 25th, who's already served a decent amount of time on a list. And another one of those is Lockie Sullivan, who's already 27. Age-wise, they had 8 guys 30 or older. Dan McStay is going to be 30 next week. And they only had 2 players 21 or younger, those being Ed Allen and Will Hayes.
And that was a debut game for Hayes, or was it like his second game?
That was game 2. He had debuted 2 weeks prior against North. And I'd say he was mostly in there because Pat Lipinski and Lockie Schultz were missing.
Now, this is a team that is a destination club and always seems to have the resources to make trades, so there's a chance they just address that part of the age group that's kind of thin just through trades. But as a whole, I think this is going to transform to being a team that's got a much younger core and leadership group in the coming years. And it's a matter of how gracefully do they make that transition and what can they do between now and that.
This has been a good mix this episode of teams exceeding expectations, teams where their success isn't a surprise to us. And then we got these last fellas. The wheel spins to its inevitable destination at the SCG because the Sydney Swans have, well, let's start by saying they were hit by the injury bug. Most notably, Errol Golden has yet to be cited this year, though he is a test coming out of the bye, which is great because the footy is better when he's up and going. They'd had a decent amount of time without Tom Papley. Have we still not seen Logan McDonald at AFL level either?
I don't think so. I mean, you could make a case just with their form or lack thereof without Golden that he should be up there with Heaney and Chad Warner in like the club best and fairest conversation.
I've been telling you for 3 years, maybe?
I mean, I've known last year it was really apparent, and it's been apparent in a totally different sense this year.
I believe he finished within the top 10 of America's Brownlow, even with Heaney getting his chunk of votes too. And I can confirm that now looking at it because Heaney finished 7th and Golden was in a tie for 9th. We are running America's Brownlow again this year. Look for that. What is it? Probably Tuesday of grand final week again?
Somewhere in that range. So this Swans team, some regression was to be expected between just a coaching change, coming off a grand final loss, and then getting hit by the injury bug, but I don't think anyone figured it would be this dire. They currently sit in 13th at 5-8, a season that already includes 4 home losses, including a 90-point beatdown by the Crows in round 12.
Whoa! Where did that come from? Whoa!
And I mean, of the wins, I guess the Derby win is good. The win at Freo is good, although that was when the Dockers were really struggling.
Yeah, that was their first win of the year in round 2, because they opened with 2 home losses to the Hawks in the opening game of the year, and then the Lions round 1.
None of which are bad losses.
No, we didn't really start raising alarm until, what, the loss to the Suns by 38? Even losing to Collingwood by 31 during Gather Round didn't raise any alarm. It was some combination of losing at home to Port, then getting thoroughly outplayed by the Suns, round 6 and 7 there, that the concern really started to mount.
I think that's because, the perspective was, and there were a couple other people, like I think the Did the Swans Win page was of this perspective as well. It's like if you can just get to the bye around 500, considering the tougher schedule and the injuries, you'd feel all right. And they did not do that. They got in at 5-8, and just like that Crows loss was really bad. The Essendon loss, they probably should have lost it by a lot more than 8. They got spanked by the D's a week before that Crows loss. I forget who had brought this up, which footy media personality, but like Dean Cox is getting some crap for, just the way they've played. He's one of the few things that's changed from last year, other than, a lot of guys getting hurt. But yeah, I think the player leadership probably comes into question as well. It's just the amount of like bad and undisciplined and messy performances this team has had.
Didn't help that that leadership was less consistent, with Mills still missing most of the first part of the year. He is back now, but then he got suspended. They've been rotating a few guys into the captaincy role. Heaney was there. Rowbottom was there. I feel like Rowbottom's attitude is right for that sort of role, though. I dig that.
Oh, yeah. Super physical, the sort of guy that can kind of emerge in any moment and is never going to waver. He's one that I would definitely consider, like just off of play style, not knowing too much about personality and stuff, but just off of play style, he plays like he should have that role.
There's some guys where you just look at them and the way they play, it's like, oh man, this guy should be in a leadership role. I feel that about Liam Ryan, as I've said repeatedly when it comes to my Eagles fandom.
Tom Atkins is one that I always go to, and similar to Rowbottom, he's a tackling machine.
I think you've labeled him as like your non-captain captain.
Yes, many times. This is, for anyone who's listened before, this is not a new thing. This is not a revelation.
I feel like I could make like a Dead Poets Society meal that's just like, oh, non-captain captain, my non-captain captain. That'll be a conversation for next week. Where the Swans are at now, they're at that part of the ladder where putting a line through them isn't anything crazy.
No, but just knowing the Golden's getting back, even though they've used up so much margin for error, that could be such a massive shift, kind of like we've seen with their crosstown rivals with Finn Callahan.
It could easily happen. However, in order to make finals, usually need at least, yes, Hutto? 13 wins. Can you see the Swans winning 8 of 10 and building enough percent of the process because they're down at 90.1?
It's a pretty difficult schedule the rest of the way, but
I mean, fitting of last year's minor premiers. I mean, Port off the bye, even though it's on the road, seems attainable. Home games after that against the Dogs and Dockers. The home games you got to clean up, with the exception maybe of Geelong round 23.
I mean, I think the Bulldogs at home will be, can be a pain. I think the Dockers can be a pain. The Dockers won their last year.
Oh, yeah, that was a funny one.
There's room to basically slip up like once outside of the trip to the GABA.
Good luck.
I think during the Frio game,
I remember him being the most animated guy in that box always whenever there were big moments, and that's just seeing John Longmire as stoic as can be. It's such a huge contrast. What's kept up for the Swans from last year? That's a question then.
Isaac Heaney and Chad Warner have still been pretty darn good.
For the most part, I'd say Heaney and Chad, yes. And nice to see Chad's brother Corey get more consistent opportunities too, I must say.
He's starting to develop.
Those two are the disposal leaders for the Swans this year. Third actually didn't play this past week in round 13. That was Matt Roberts. He was sick.
But I think sometimes he's been one who's been more numbers than impact.
Maybe that is, though, part of why Nick Blakey got even more of a stack of the ball than normal in round 13, because that was when he went off for 34 against Richmond.
You were asking about what had carried over, and yeah, I would say Blakey is one of those things who's still producing for the most part. He'll have a sloppy game here or there, but overall he's been quite good. And then I think Tom McCartan as a one-on-one defender has actually gotten even better, which makes the stint that he had playing forward even more ridiculously stupid.
You know how I said Richmond didn't even have somebody kicking 20 goals this year?
Are the Swans, do they not have anyone at like 10 yet?
They've got 6 different guys at 10, but nobody's kicked more than 17.
Okay, that makes sense.
Who is their goal leader? It's not Heaney.
Chad Warner?
No, he's at 14, which is 4th.
Who is it?
It's Will Hayward, particularly I think off the back of that 4-goal performance he had in round 4 against North. Hayward remains one of the barometers for the Swans, especially in Papley's absence. I mean, he easily had his most productive season last year, kicked 41-16. You expected a bit of regression there. It hasn't been overwhelming, but I don't think the delivery to him has been as consistent. And with Papley out, I think some more attention has gone to Hayward also. I like what he can do as a top defensive forward, and we see that those guys can still get marks and scoring opportunities. Can't believe I'm making a Jake Belksham comparison here, but I am.
You would think with Golden soon to come back, the delivery gets better, but
you'd already expect, decent delivery from a guy like Braden Campbell in there. Campbell's actually one of the 10-goal kickers.
He and Angus Sheldrick have been among the bigger surprising positives this year. I think just kind of like they have had some depth pieces that have been good. I just they've had some big holes in other areas. Brody Grundy, for the most part, has been more like he was in the second half of last year, which, considering his age, he's still fine, but this is a team that really thrives when he's really on it, and I don't think he's necessarily been. Ollie Florent got dropped down to the sub role a couple times and has been dropped completely. He's had it really rough. Taylor Adams, coming off of injuries, really just hasn't gotten into the swing of things.
He's unfortunately part of the glass bones paper skin team, and that carries over from his Collingwood stint, of course. And, you also just haven't had consistent forward presence on the tall side with just the set of injuries and suspensions that have been there. I think Joel Amartey being out for suspension has hurt the most there, and he's due to come back. So Amarty and McLennan there both should lead to a bit more stable presence there in the forward 50.
Well, here's another positive I hadn't mentioned earlier. Sam Wicks, other than the game against the Crows, has put together a pretty nice campaign.
In defense, whereas we'd thought of him as like a smaller half forward type before. Like he's been the new surprise in defense.
But like Rowbottom has just been okay when they need him to be more than that. Dane Rampy's shown some age. Jake Lloyd's been quiet. And then you had guys like Riley Bice who had a great start to the year and have completely fallen off. Joel Hamling's gotten thrust into some awkward roles because of injuries. The Ben Patton experiment has not worked at all. So I feel like this is a team that's both one more big-time player and a couple depth pieces away from really hitting its stride. And all of those things are possible. Again, Golden could easily be that big-time player. And then, take your pick out of the guys towards the back of the list that are just like...
There's a whole bunch of guys there. If Sheldrick gets a steadier role, he's one that you could highlight. Someone else there in that smaller mix with like Caden Cleary or Tom Hanley are other options. Cleary had a slower start to the year because you may recall his suspension for some sort of drug thing where he didn't even tell the club, which just like completely incensed me. I thought the suspension should have been doubled by the Swans.
Yeah, going out and doing dumb things in your teens and 20s, it happens, but not taking any accountability for it afterwards is going to just hurt your relationship with the club.
When the club is also plenty able to provide resources to assist you. It was a 2-game suspension. I wanted the Swans to say, fuck it, it's 4. And I don't think that's a larger culture thing with them because this is like, I don't think we've heard of anybody else with drug issues there or anything of the sort. It's not like you got somebody providing it at the club like Joel Smith was.
Or like the communications director for the Angels.
Maybe with some assistance from Wade Miley.
Possibly. Oh yeah, for those of you that don't know about baseball stuff, basically the Angels were running a drug ring with some of their staff and it killed one of their players from an overdose.
But that another player has also been roped into things, and I'm not even sure he was even on the Angels.
He was not. He had been teammates in Arizona.
This is something that goes back to 2019.
And beyond that, actually.
Yeah, that's a depressing way to go here. But I mean, a lot of the Swans season has been depressing, so how fitting.
Again, though, I just like...
The pieces are very much there, and I expect a sophomore rise from Dean Cox. Because you can't expect it would be this bad again.
I am just hesitant to really write this team off, knowing that I think their ceiling still remains among the highest out there. But I'll be able to pass judgment quickly coming out of this bye, especially if Golden does get in for that Port game. Again, we'll learn just how important he is. That might be one of the games I'm most excited for this round, other than obviously Geelong against Brisbane.
That could be a solid second option there, yeah.
But yeah, going at Port, then home against the Bulldogs and Dockers, I think...
We'll learn everything we need to know about the 2025 Swans within the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. If they go less than 2-1, season's finished.
We've already talked a bit about my sleeper pick because it's Corey Warner, who has already had 8 goals this year and has had the most time yet in his career. I mean, he's played more games in 2025, 13. Brian, I'll use it again.
13!
Then he had his first 2 years combined at 9. He's different from his brother.
But he's just made a lot of steady, quiet, consistent improvements, Nothing to like knock your socks off, but he's been a guy who's elevated his floor.
Getting close to 12 disposals and 2 tackles a game, and still a lot of growth in him. Just 21 years of age. Your sleeper has not gotten in games yet, but I like the idea of him being prominent in a year or two.
I assume that was Riak Andrew?
Yes. I love that Melbourne declined the pick on Riak when there was like such an uproar over the whole policy, that the fact that Mac Andrew could get away to the Suns. Your 2023 pick of Angus Sheldrick is starting to look nicer and nicer, though. And
yeah, I think he's at this point where, like, on a fully healthy team, you'd love to have him as the super sub.
I'd like to think the Swans are really trying to get after his signature because he is out of contract at the end of this year. and he is from the West. ... No, you got all this talk about Harley Reid and maybe leaving. Why isn't there so much buzz about like the depth pieces from the West that could leave? You got the go home factor there too, right? Who could the Eagles be targeting? That's just not how the media cycle goes. But I think we've gone on long enough here.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think this was a pretty comprehensive report, and we'll be doing this, 2 more times, I guess? 2 more bye rounds?
Yup, rounds 15 and 16 will have 4 more teams on byes each time. And then we'll have one other kind of progress report type thing, because during the pre-finals bye, we do a 2-parter called So You Didn't Crack the 8, which is one of my favorite things to do because, again, I just like highlighting those teams that are going to probably otherwise only get attention in trade conversation.
Yes, as we've introduced it before, history is written by the winners, but who writes about the losers or podcasts about the losers? It's not quite as good as like Urinating Tree, when he does his playoff previews and does like really sarcastic eulogies of all the teams that didn't make it, but I think you get some actual decent analysis out of us. Again, not Urinating Tree level. He is so good at this sort of stuff. But
I would love for him to get into the footy.
Yes, every American sports YouTube guy that I watch needs to get into footy and ideally just get familiar with St. Kilda's history, even if you don't do anything else.
I don't care that they've won a championship. The fact that they only won one in 150 years makes them feel like they should be like Dorktown fodder for the secret base guys, John Boyes and Alex Rubenstein.
I also would have loved to hear what Urinating Tree would have had to say about North's whole selling games to the West thing.
We need to make this happen.
Like, a footy This Week in Sports Ball would be really fun.
All right, we've got to log off and really maybe get on to that case. I'm at BenjaminHK01 on Twitter.
I'm at Castle Media on Twitter, also with a K. Ryan Harambe is sitting right next to me. He's on Instagram at Cat Named Ryan. He's probably very hungry, so I'm going to go attend to that.
We're at Americans Footy on multiple different platforms. Once again, good time of day.